Lane Community College presents the Lane Peace and Democracy Conference.
And can you really succeed in war in the first place? You know, is there such a thing as winning a war?
We have now surpassed the military budget of the rest of the world combined.
The world can no longer entertain the delusion that the U.S. standard of living is possible for the entire planet.
I've tried the kumbaya, and we're all the same, and you know, that doesn't work anymore.
Just as war is too important to leave to the generals, civil liberties is too important to leave to the lawyers.
Women are standing up in these prestigious positions, and it's time.
We live in a society that is unequal, that is unjust, that is full of oppression and racism.
We need to commit to removal of all our forces.
And a favorite law enforcement tactic is to disturb a hive and then listen for the buzz.
You do not clear-cut forests to make toilet paper.
And then the riot police came in and told us, okay, everyone needs to stand in the sidewalk unless you want to get pepper sprayed or arrested.
And the Peace Center will be an important element in making a difference for ourselves, our community, and in time, the world.
And that all rights are equally important. The right not to be tortured or the right to vote is as important as the right to shelter and the right to food.
The biggest threat to humanity, it does come down to massive death.
Pepper spraying and shooting automatic rubber bullets into the crowd, so it sounded like machine gun, and everyone was pretty scared.
And our country has 1 out of every 100 of our people in jail.
The world economic system is destabilizing.
Terrorist acts are better treated as criminal acts with political implications rather than as an act of war.
The need to teach peace is obvious. The need to teach people other values besides war is obvious.
And if we leave it to a political party and a leader to decide whether to bring those troops home, they're not coming home.
After Seattle came 9/11 and a neoconservative agenda for war that took us not only into Afghanistan but into Iraq, with the projections to go into multiple countries if the opportunity is allowed by the general public. And that, I think, is what spurred her into Code Pink and this very strong, active, anti-war activism that has not only brought huge numbers of people into the activist movement, but has taken her to Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq, where she has met with the families of people who have been killed, has met with refugees that have been displaced. And that kind of reaching out, that kind of empathy that gets created across nations, it's hard to express how important that is. And Medea is the person, or one of the people, who is engaged in organizing and making that happen. Medea Benjamin.
So since I'm short, it might be better if I speak over here. I want to just, before I begin, every good organizer has to plug their organizations. So Stan mentioned 2 of them, and I want to give you the websites if you want to go look up more information. One is Global Exchange, and it's simply globalexchange.org, and the other is Code Pink. Somebody had already had the URL for Code Pink, so it's codepinkalert.org. And some of you might have heard me saying we wanted Code Hot Pink, but a porn group already had that one. So it's codepinkalert.org. And please check out the websites and all the campaigns we do, and we would love your support. While I'm speaking, I'm going to leave up on the screen a picture of an Iraqi woman whose name is Vivian Salim Mati. Because I want you every once in a while as I'm speaking to just take a look at her, take a look at her face, take a look at her eyes, and you see the tremendous pain, the tremendous grief, the tremendous suffering. She is a Christian woman living in Baghdad. Her family, she's holding pictures of her husband and her children. And as she was leaving her home in Baghdad one day when there were bullets flying and she was seeking refuge, she came upon a U.S. military roadblock and the soldiers started shooting. And first they shot right into the car and killed her husband. Then they killed the children in the back seat. And then she watched as a bullet went through her youngest child's forehead that was sitting on her lap. This woman represents to me the pain and suffering of war. She also is somebody that we tried to get to the United States to tell her story. And in the tragic irony, the State Department said that they wouldn't allow her into the United States because she was at risk of staying here because she no longer had any family to go back to in Iraq. And she has a brother in Detroit who would like to take care of her. It's very difficult these days for a woman to make it on her own in Iraq. And we can't even get a visa for her to come here and get some help from the only family that she has left. So keep her story in mind. And I want to talk about other women in Iraq because a number of you had an opportunity to meet one of the women that we did bring here, Eman Ahmed Kamas. Can you raise your hand if you met with her when she was here? Wow, a lot of you. So a number of you have been asking me about her, what she's doing, how she's doing. She is one of 6 women that we brought to the United States several years ago to go on a 100-city speaking tour. They were Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish women, and they represented 80% of the Iraqi people who have consistently said, we want your troops out of our country. And they came and told their horror stories of what it means to be an occupied country. And they told stories, some of them had suffered terribly under Saddam Hussein, and they talked about the suffering being even greater under an occupation. And things have gotten significantly worse since they came. And Eman, who is the one here in Eugene, those of you who got a chance to meet her know that she's a very well-educated woman. She was a university professor. She was a student of English literature, American literature. And I remember the first time I met her being blown away because she asked me, what are your favorite African-American women poets? And I was like, Maya Angelou? And she named off about 12 of them, and she could recite their poetry, and she loved American literature. She loved African-American literature. She loved poetry. She was a woman who also loved her own culture and her own civilization that went back for so many thousands of years. And she would always say to us that Iraq is the birthplace of civilization. And so no matter how bad things get in my country, I will never leave here. It's where the Tigris and Euphrates River came together. It's where my heart is, and I will never leave. Eman has left Iraq. She's one of the lucky ones because she's been able to leave. Some friends in Spain gave her and her family refuge in Spain. Yet she can't work. She doesn't have work papers. She didn't speak the language. She is dependent on charity from friends. And as I say, she's one of the lucky ones. One of the other women who came here, a very, very proud woman and a pharmacist in the largest hospital in Baghdad doing very, very important work trying to keep people alive when they got to the hospital. She couldn't take it anymore either and left the country. She sought refuge in England. She lives hand to mouth with her 2 daughters, dependent also on charity. She is one of the lucky ones. And then, of course, there are the over 1 million Iraqi refugees who are in neighboring countries, in Jordan, in Syria, most of them living in very desperate situations because they don't have the right to work in those countries, and so they don't have an income. those are the lucky ones. Of course, the ones that are the least lucky are the ones who are dead, the ones who are wounded, the ones who are too poor to even leave Iraq, the ones that are living in what is nicely termed refugee camps, but there's nothing nice about them. This is what our occupation of Iraq has wrought. And I have a chance to speak to people in the U.S. military on a constant basis. And I'm always having, particularly men, but also women in the military, coming to me and saying, "You should be ashamed of what you're doing. We have liberated the women of Iraq. And if it were up to you, the Taliban would have taken over, and they would take over the United States, and you wouldn't be allowed to speak. And you should be happy that we have saved the women of Iraq." And I often don't know where to start, because women in Iraq were some of the most liberated women in the entire Middle East. It was a secular country. Yes, Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator, but women had been struggling way before Saddam Hussein to get rights that they got way back in the 50s, including a family code that was the most progressive in the Middle East and gave women the same rights as men to very critical things like marriage, divorce, inheritance, right to children. And women in Iraq had the right to education. And unlike here in the United States, education in Iraq was free all the way to postgraduate. You could become a doctor and never pay a cent. And so the first time that I went to Iraq was before the U.S. invaded, and you saw women in every area of life. You saw them as doctors, as nurses, as professors. You saw them as judges, as teachers. You saw women in the marketplace, women buying and women selling. And they also had the right to either wear a veil or not wear a veil. And many of the women did not wear a veil. Well, the rights of Iraqi women have gone back maybe 100 years since the U.S. invaded. They now don't have that same kind of family law that they had. They now don't have the right to even walk in the streets uncovered in many places in Iraq, because we have put fundamentalists in power who are demanding that women cover themselves up, and even going to the extent of things like throwing acid on women who refuse to cover. And there are phenomena in Iraq right now that didn't exist before, like the kidnapping of women, like the selling and trafficking of women. And there are now jobs that these fundamentalists don't want Iraqi women to have. And then, of course, there aren't many jobs for any Iraqis at this point. And Iraqi women have to suffer to try to bring up their families without decent electricity, without a decent water supply, and without a regular family income. So don't tell us that Iraqi women have been liberated by our occupation. In fact, I was at a talk given by Shireen Ebadi. Do you know the Iranian woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize? And she was talking about the situation in Iran and how, yes, there were many limitations on women's rights, and how women were very anxious to see a change in government and to see themselves having more rights. And then she stopped at one point and she said, "But please don't bring us democracy from the United States. Please don't liberate us," in quotes, because they see, of course, what's happened to women in Iraq. So we've been talking the last couple of days about how to resist occupation. And we've been talking about an opening with the coming elections, and some people feeling that this is a time to be working to get a change in the White House, and that hopefully a new president, and for many people feeling hopefully Barack Obama would be the new president, this would be our opening to end the war. So how many of you think that whoever the next president is, we could get the troops home by the end of, let's say, 2009? How many people don't think they would be home by 2009? Wow. That's very disconcerting because the majority of you don't think the troops will be home by 2009, even if Barack Obama is president. Well, I would say the answer to that question really depends on us. And if we leave it to a political party and a leader to decide whether to bring those troops home, they're not coming home. So now is the time, yes, to work hard to get a change in the leadership, but also to work hard to revive the peace movement. Because our movement was much stronger 5 years ago, but now we're 5 years into the war and we're coming up on the anniversary of the war and we're coming up on the anniversary, it will soon be 4,000 U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq. And we have to re-energize ourselves. And some of the best energy I see happening around the country is coming from the movement to focus on one of the pillars of how you end war. And one of those pillars is you stop soldiers from being recruited to fight in the war. So I want to congratulate a lot of you who have been doing this work of counter-recruitment, education, going into the schools, going to the recruiting centers, providing alternatives to young people, getting the truth out at what might happen to them if they join the military at this point in their careers. Many of the recruiters exaggerating the benefits, some of them even lying about them. And young people being told that if they're going into the military, they won't necessarily be sent to Iraq. And many of you being there to say, come on, you're going to be sent to Iraq. Not only one time, 2 times, 3 times. Look at people who are on their 4th deployments. And I also want to congratulate those of you who are working on the issue of the National Guard in Oregon, because I hear there's a call to resend the National Guard in 2009, 3,500 of your National Guard. And it is very important that you focus on that issue and say we need our National Guard to protect us here at home and not to be fighting this insane war and occupation in Iraq. And I think those of us in the room understand this, but I want to say it clearly to people who might be listening on the radio and don't understand it, that the work that we do in counter-recruitment is because we love the troops and is because we love our young people. And we love the troops so much that we are desperate to see them come back home to be in the arms of their loved ones. And we love our youth so much that we don't want them in the richest country in the world to be told that if you want to get an education, which is free in so many countries around the world, you have an option of going into the military to kill or be killed in order to get your education. We should say to young people, education should be free in this country. You should not have to make that kind of a choice. How many of you have heard anything about the issue that is going on at the Marine Recruiting Station in Berkeley, California? Okay, about half of you maybe. Well, for those of you who don't know about it, it's a very important issue, so I want to explain what's happening there. Berkeley, some of you might know, is a city known for its commitment to peace. It was the birthplace of the free speech movement in the 60s, had a very strong anti-war movement during the time of Vietnam, but also during these years has come out very outspoken, like Eugene has, around many issues. It came out to say no war with Iran. It made the city a sanctuary city for conscientious objectors. It voted to bring home the National Guard. It's on record saying, quote, "It is a fundamental value of the Berkeley community that we must seek to resolve international disputes through collective international diplomacy and without war." This is on record as the city's mandate. So, lo and behold, walking through the town of Berkeley one day, the local Code Pink chapter looked up and saw there was a Marine recruiting station right in the heart of this city that has such a commitment to peace and has spoken out so strongly against the war. Remember, this is also the home of Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the only person that came out after 9/11 and said war is not the answer, who said in the beautiful speech she gave on the floor of the House that day, "Let us not become the evil we deplore." And so when Code Pink women from Berkeley were walking down the street and saw all of a sudden, there had never been a recruiting station in Berkeley, saw a recruiting station in the heart of their city, they said, this doesn't fit with the moral values of the city right now, at this point in time, when we are in a war that the people of Berkeley do not support. We don't want our young people being enticed to be recruited into that war. And so we started to protest outside the recruiting station. And being Code Pink, we're a little flamboyant, and we like to sometimes, have a good time while we're out protesting. We thought, well, there's a parade once a year that's called How Berkeley Can You Be, where all the sort of Berkeleyness comes out. Let's turn the space in front of the recruiting station into a kind of How Berkeley Can You Be. And that's the positive vision of what we would like to see in our communities instead of people being recruited for war. So out in front of the recruiting station, since September, every day there's been some kind of activity. Well, there are free massages you can get outside there. You can get, there's a breastfeeding group that comes out. There's a children's play group. You can get salsa lessons right outside the recruiting station. There's a choir that comes to sing out there. And one of the veterans from the Iraq War, one of the members of Iraq Veterans Against the War, does a weekly kiss-in outside the recruiting station. And well, he and his girlfriend, they kiss for about 2 hours. And they've got these signs that say, make out, not war. And it says, they also have one that says, kiss, don't enlist, that way we all make out. There was a little bit of a tragedy about a month ago where they broke up and we were all so brokenhearted, but they got back together, I think just because we needed them to be out there kissing. So it has become a community activity to be doing something every day outside the recruiting station. Well, it's not a very big sidewalk, and so it actually became a bit of a hazard. And so we went to the Berkeley Council and said, at least one day a week, can you give us an ongoing permit so that we can take the parking space right outside and turn that into a place where we do our activities? And Berkeley City Council thought, well, that sounds good. And so they passed a measure that gave Code Pink a parking space right in front of the Marine recruiting station for 6 months. They also gave us a 6-month sound permit, so we didn't have to keep going back to ask for one. Well, everything was fine. We kind of went on with that. Well, then something else happened. The Peace and Justice Commission in Berkeley made a resolution that they passed to the City Council, and the City Council usually just takes them and kind of rubber stamps them, I guess. They didn't read it real carefully. And it said that the city should support the work of Code Pink and other groups that are trying to impede the recruiting in their city, that Berkeley is a city for peace, and that the Marines recruiting station was not welcome in Berkeley, and that if they stayed in Berkeley, they would be considered unwanted and uninvited intruders. Well, the language was a little harsh. And it got out beyond the bounds of Berkeley. You know, what happens in Berkeley should stay in Berkeley, but this didn't, so this went out. And you can imagine when Bill O'Reilly got hold of it, when Sean Hannity got hold of it, when this group called Move America Forward got hold of it, this group called the Free Republic got hold of it, all hell broke loose. So there was a council meeting that was coming up after that. And the pro-war forces said, we are going to descend on Berkeley. And they said, we're going to be there for 7 p.m. when the city council meets. And we're going to give them a piece of our mind. And we thought, uh-oh, well, we better be there before. We'll be there at noon. And we called our people for a noon press conference. And they saw that and they said, all right, we're going to be there at 5 in the morning. And we thought, okay, a camp out. We'll get there the night before. And sure enough, we got there the night before. We put up our tents. We made a beautiful little tent city outside the city council. And there were about 2,000 people that day that came out from both sides. Over 100 of them spoke before the Berkeley City Council. And while there was a lot of screaming and yelling, and there was a lot of dialogue that went on as well. One of my favorite, which is somewhere between screaming and yelling and dialogue, took place between the high school students at Berkeley, because the park where we were all meeting is right adjacent to Berkeley High. So before school starts, the young people come out and they use it as a place to skateboard. So they came out, they're all happy in the morning, you know, with their skateboards ready to skateboard. And lo and behold, these pro-war people that came from outside Berkeley, they were right in that skateboard area. So the young people went up and said, you know, can you move? This is our place. And they said, no, you just can't skateboard today. You know, that'll have to wait till tomorrow. And they said, oh, I don't think so. Well, it was a showdown like you wouldn't believe, because they called their friends, and then there were hundreds of Berkeley high school students with their skateboards, and they were facing off some of these biker dudes, and then that we started a chant saying, skateboard, don't waterboard, skateboard, don't waterboard. The skateboarders won. They moved out, they got a chance to skate, and they felt very empowered by the whole thing. And what was so great is after school, they came out to join us again. And you saw that wonderful, youthful energy. But what's happening in Berkeley is that this has become a symbol for the pro-war forces. And they are coming down very hard on the city. They're calling for funds to the city to be cut, federal funding. They're calling at the state level for funds to be cut for transportation. They said, if you keep giving Code Pink that parking space, we're going to take away $2.2 million of your transportation funds. We thought maybe we would auction off our parking space on eBay starting at $2.2 million and see what we could get for it. And then businesses outside of Berkeley are calling on people to boycott Berkeley. The Chamber of Commerce is now horrified, and they're saying, oh my God, this is hurting business. And all kinds of press are descending on Berkeley to talk to the local businesses to say, is your business being hurt by all of this? And meanwhile, the city council got about 30,000 hate mail. We sent them many thousands of positive mail, but they called us up and they said, please don't ask people to send us mail anymore. We can't handle it. So most of the mail they got was pretty nasty. I thought if I don't read the swear words in these, I can just read a little bit. You are sick, tactless traitors. You trash the very people that give you freedom and the right to be such worthless, annoying, self-righteous blank. And don't bother calling this a threat. It's a promise. If you come to my town, I'll kill you just like all traitors should be killed. See if I'm playing around, and I'll see you dead. Do not F with the military. Here's another one. Get out of my country, you pinko bastards. This one was to us. Berkeley should be napalmed. Wouldn't it be nice to see Al-Qaeda thugs beheading all those menopausal morons from Code Pink? Man, that would be sweet. Sincerely, U.S. Marine. I'll get one more just for laughs. This was to me, personally. My husband thought it was great. You are a lesbo commie slut, and most of this country would love to see you strung up from the tallest oak tree in America. You traitorous whore. Get the hell out of America and go to Iran or Venezuela, where your hatred for America and the military will be appreciated. Sergeant Rock, U.S. Army, easy company. Anyway, this is just a sampling of the many, many, many thousands of letters that we at Code Pink have received and that the City Council has received. So I think that we in the peace movement have to revive Berkeley as a symbol for peace, a symbol for love. And we're trying to do it at the recruiting station. In fact, every Wednesday when it's the time for our parking space to go into effect, the pro-war forces come down from Sacramento. Most of them are bikers. And some Marines and former Marines come, and the Young Republican Club from UC Berkeley comes down as well. And so first it was kind of a standoff, and then we tried to break the ice. I always try to go and shake their hands. And some of them will shake my hand, and some of them, put their hands back like, you've got cooties, I won't shake your hand. And we try to talk to them. And after a couple of weeks, from not wanting to shake my hand, I'm getting close to getting a ride on one of their bikes. They're just afraid somebody's going to take the picture with me on their bike, and that would really be bad for their reputation. And last week was quite beautiful, actually, because one of the mothers of the Marines came. She came with her son, and he's a strapping young man, very proud Marine. And she came, and I asked if I could talk to her, and we started talking. And it turns out she was born in England, and she was liberated by the U.S. Army during World War II. And she loves the U.S. military. She has 4 sons. She lives, obviously, in the United States now, and they all went into the military. And she showed me the picture of all her sons, beautiful family. And I said, do you think I am your enemy? And she just sort of looked at me. Yeah. And I said, well, can I show you my picture of my children? I have 2 lovely daughters. I love my children. I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of my community. And I think my values are pretty much the same as yours are. We want our children to grow up healthy. We want grandchildren. We want happy lives for them. We want healthy communities. But we just think very differently about the ways to get there. And I happen to think that this war is actually making us less secure, not more secure. And we had quite a talk, and then at the end, she came up to me and she said, I'm really sorry that I considered you my enemy. And she said, can I give you a hug? And we hugged, and we kissed, and we cried, and we said, this is how it should be. This is how we break down stereotypes. This is how we learn to understand where each other's coming from. And we still didn't change each other's minds. She still thinks the war in Iraq is a good thing. She still thinks that that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. She still thinks that Saddam Hussein and Osama were good friends. That was not on purpose. But there was dialogue, and we need more of that. And so I actually love going to the recruiting station because passions come out. And people start talking about this damn war that we should be talking about more and we should be more passionate about. And so what we are proposing is that we take some days during the summer, maybe July 4th weekend, to make Berkeley the center of a call for peace. And asking people to come from all over the country, come together and show support for Berkeley as a city for peace, say the war stops here. So how many of you would be willing, if we can pull this off with great concerts and teach-ins and all sorts of fun stuff, to come down to Berkeley to show your support? Great. All right. We've already packed the park with you. So another area, another pillar of this war is, of course, the funding. And I talked about the elections coming up on the presidential election, but we also have all of Congress being voted on again. I can't express my disappointment with Congress. I was so naive as to think that when we voted in a new Congress in November 2006 with this very, very clear mandate for peace, that we were going to see some change. And Code Pink got a house on the Hill to be ready to greet Congress when they came in. And we have been there every day ever since to say, didn't you listen to the people in November 2006? Didn't you understand that that was a mandate to end the war? How can you not be listening? And what's really fascinating is if you look at the Democratic candidates in the primary, including the ones, like Edwards and Dodd and Richardson, all of them were more progressive than most of their colleagues, the Democrats in the Congress, because they were out and about talking to people all the time, and wherever they went, they heard people saying, get us out of Iraq. So we have a Congress that is really duplicitous, because they get our votes, and we voted many of them in because they ran on an anti-war ticket, and then they go ahead and keep funding the war. And I say this with deep concern precisely because my congressperson is Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. And we had high hopes for Nancy Pelosi. We thought getting in a woman from San Francisco was going to make a real difference. And we have not been able to get Nancy Pelosi to even meet with the peace community in San Francisco since she became Speaker. Shame. She is supposed to be a model of what democracy is about. And democracy means at the very least, listen to your constituents. The last town hall meeting that Nancy Pelosi had was in January of 2006. And you know why she doesn't want to have a town hall meeting? Because she knows that people would pack that town hall meeting to say, stop funding the war and put impeachment on the table. And she doesn't want to hear that. But let's be clear, at least to all of us in this room, while the Democrats place the blame for the war on the Republicans, and while they say they can't get enough votes to stop funding the war, and that even if they did, it would be vetoed by George Bush, there is a very simple way for them to stop funding the war. And that is, don't put a funding bill on the floor to be voted on. That's right. Nancy Pelosi has the power as Speaker of the House to decide what bills get voted on and what don't. And she manipulates to vote against a bill, but to have it go to the floor for a vote, knowing that it will pass, knowing that the money will go to continue this war. And they have had this mentality that the most important thing is to take back the White House, let the war be blamed on George Bush, and we will coast along, letting the war keep getting funded until the presidential elections. And we have to say that's not good enough. And we will not allow them to keep funding the war without consequences. They have to know in an election year that we will not support anybody who continues to fund this war. So, the funding of the war is a huge pillar. And it's interesting how recently the Democrats have come out with a whole campaign now around the cost of the war. Have you been hearing this? And the recent, the book that just came out by Joseph Stiglitz, the economist, and a woman, Linda Bilds from Harvard, that have talked about the $3 trillion war. Quite astounding when you look at these numbers. You know, we're spending $12 billion a month just on the war in Iraq. If you add Afghanistan, it's $16 billion a month. And we can all think and make a long laundry list of all the things we would like to do with that money, but it certainly would not be spending that to continue to occupy Iraq. So, focusing on the funding of the war is very important in the coming months because there's another bill coming up, another $100 billion being called for to fund this war. And it's also important to focus on who is benefiting from the funding of the war. You want to yell out some beneficiaries? Halliburton, and Halliburton was KBR Halliburton. Now they're separate, and they each get their $1 billion contracts in the war. Who else? Blackwater. And I heard Hillary Clinton just came out and said that Blackwater shouldn't get government contracts, like yesterday. She's now so desperate that she's finding the light. Who else is benefiting from this war economically?
Exxon.
The oil companies. George Bush recently was asked about the cost of the war because it is now coming out into the public view that this war is not costing $50 billion like we were told before it started, but is costing $3 trillion. And he said, actually, the war is good for the economy because it creates jobs. Oh, what a horrible thing to say. But of course, this war is good for his buddies in the oil business because they have never made more profits than they're making now. And it's not profits from the oil in Iraq, it's profits because the slowdown in the production of oil in Iraq has raised the price of oil in general. And so now we have oil at over $100 a barrel. And these oil companies are making money hand over fist. And George Bush's friends are actually delighted. Yes, creating tremendous excess profits in this war. One of the things that you'll see on our Code Pink website is some of the campaigns we've been doing around the war profiteers. And one of them, as some of you yelled out, is KBR. KBR and Halliburton, both getting multi-billion-dollar no-bid contracts even before the war began. And one of the particular areas we were just focusing on is KBR and its inability to even guarantee the well-being of its female contractors in Iraq who are being raped by their male co-workers. And 20,000 contractors are now female. When they sign up with these companies, they are forced to sign an arbitration clause that says they cannot sue the company, they cannot take their case into the court of law, they must go into binding arbitration. Well, guess what? KBR wins 80% of the arbitration cases, stacked in favor of the companies. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, because several women, including a woman, Jamie Lee Jones, you might have heard of her, have come forward to tell horrendous stories of being gang raped in Iraq, and then KBR employees, instead of helping her out, trying to destroy the evidence, putting her in a holding cell for 24 hours without food and water, threatening her if she went forward that she would be in big trouble if she disclosed. And since she has come forward, 38 other women from KBR have also come forward with horrible tales about rape and sexual assault and intimidation in Iraq. And so we have a campaign right now to bar KBR from getting any more government contracts as long as they continue to force people to sign these arbitration contracts, and as long as they continue to refuse to protect the well-being of their female employees. One of the things that Code Pink did and continues to do is to raise funds for Iraqis. We look at women like Vivian, the picture up here, and we think we have to continue to raise money to send to Iraqi women and children to express at some level our feeling of responsibility for their lives. And in several of the occasions, we physically took material aid to Iraq. And on some of those occasions, we actually took parents of children, U.S. soldiers who died in Iraq, or parents of soldiers who are presently serving in Iraq, to show that they loved the Iraqi people, that they didn't hate the Iraqi people, and they wanted our policies to be one that actually helped them, not hurt them. And so on one occasion, we took $650,000 worth of material aid, mostly medicines for children, to the people of Fallujah after that town was destroyed by the U.S. military, once in April of 2004 and then again in November. Well, for that gesture of solidarity with the women and children, we have been targeted constantly by people in this country who call us traitors, who say that we are supporting the enemy. And I tell them that innocent women and children are certainly not my enemy. and that what we have to do is get out of this mindset of us versus them, the Iraqi people as our enemy. There is a book called The Deserter's Tale that a young man called Joshua Key wrote about his time in the military. And he talked about boot camp when they were lined up on a bayonet range facing life-size dummies we were told to imagine was a Muslim man. As we stabbed the dummies with our bayonets, the commander shouted, "Kill, kill, kill the sand niggers." We were made to shout out, "Kill the sand niggers," as we stabbed the heads, the hearts, and slashed the throats of our imaginary victims. Iraqis, he said, we were taught we're not civilians, not even people. We called them hajis, habibs, ragheads, sand niggers. They were the enemy. We were taught not to think of them with a shred of humanity. No wonder that by the time I flew overseas to war, I thought that all Muslims were terrorists, all terrorists were Muslims, and the only solution was to kill as many Iraqis as possible. We not only have to stop the funding for the war, give our young people alternatives to recruitment, but we have to change the culture of this country that has an us versus them mentality, that glorifies violence, that thinks that we can be safe by invading other countries, that thinks that there is a right that we have to not only occupy other countries, but to abuse other people, to hold them in Guantanamo without trials, without charges, indefinitely, a right that we have to defy the Geneva Conventions. Our new culture has to be one that starts with an understanding that we are one humanity, with an understanding that we have to show love for people outside our borders, and particularly at this moment in our history, love for the Iraqi people. And I wanted to give you some examples of where we can find that. I had an amazing experience on my first trip to Iraq, when it was Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And this was a month before the U.S. invaded. In fact, we thought we were going at the time in February 2002 when the U.S. was about to invade, and we felt we just had to be there. And so a group of women through Code Pink got together and said, we're going to go to Iraq. And we landed in Jordan. We took this long ride across the desert to the border. And we were very scared, not only about being caught in the middle of the U.S. bombing campaign, but scared about how the Iraqi people would treat us. I mean, here we were coming from the country about to attack them. And so I want to read you from a piece in our book called Stop the Next War Now that was our first experience meeting an Iraqi. This is a lesson we learned from a border guard during the regime of Saddam Hussein. When our group was passing through customs at the Jordanian-Iraqi border, a guard took my passport and looked at my last name. Benjamin, he muttered, isn't that Jewish? I got scared. Knowing the hatred between Iraq and Israel, the guard kept my passport and disappeared, leaving me to conjure up thoughts of being kidnapped and beheaded by Saddam's henchmen. A half hour later, he returned, huffing and puffing. Here, he said, putting a dog-eared notebook in my hand. I'd been teaching myself Hebrew, and I ran home to get my notebook. I wondered if you could check my grammar. Relieved and amazed, he was a little upset that I didn't speak Hebrew, but relieved and amazed, we asked why he was studying Hebrew. During the war with Iran, he said, I taught myself Farsi. And now that Jews and Muslims are at war, I've been teaching myself Hebrew. We should learn to communicate with those we are taught to see as enemies, he said, smiling. I want to give you another example, which is a very recent one, because this is about Pakistan. You know, the U.S. has been supporting the regime of Musharraf for years now. Billions of dollars of our money. And the regime of Musharraf has been using that money to crack down on civil society in Pakistan. And I don't know if you remember, a couple of months back, seeing on our television screens the police in Pakistan going after the lawyers, the students, and the journalists. Pillars of a free democratic society, cracking down on those three sectors. And the lawyers all wear these, little lawyerly uniforms, like suits. And they all look the same. And it was just a wild thing to see them being struck by batons and blood coming down onto their suits. And they would continue marching down the streets. And the government of Musharraf put the head of the Supreme Court behind bars, took the lawyers, grabbed them not only from the streets, but went into the law schools, went into the law libraries, dragged lawyers who were there studying out and pulled them out and bashed their heads in and threw them into jail. And I watched that on my TV screen and I thought, that's my tax dollars at work. That's our government giving them the funds to do that. And felt, I have to go to Pakistan and show those lawyers and the students and the journalists that it's not being done in my name. And when I tried to get people to go, even among the feisty code pinkers, they were like, Pakistan now? I don't think so. They saw a lot of they thought of bombs, they thought of beheadings, they thought it wasn't a very friendly place for Westerners, and particularly Western women. And I only managed to get one code pink person to go, actually a man, Ty Barry from Los Angeles. And we went together. A lot of people told us not to go. And we just felt compelled to go. We got to Pakistan and immediately started going to the daily demonstrations that were happening. Demonstrations of students, we'd appear there. The demonstrations where the journalists whose media had been shut down were going to say, free speech, free the media. And particularly the lawyers, because the lawyers were just fantastic. They were saying, that the bedrock of a democratic society is an independent judiciary, and we must fight for an independent judiciary. And they told us about one of the lawyers who was one of the most respected. He was the head of the Supreme Court Bar Association, and that he was behind bars in his home under house arrest. And we thought, okay, let's do a vigil at his home, the two of us. Let's just quietly go there, and we'll spend the night there. We'll go at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll stay there all day, we'll stay there all night, and it's just a small gesture of solidarity. So we went to his house, and we did go to the media beforehand and told them what we were doing. And so the independent media started getting it out, and word got out that we were there. Well, it was the most amazing experience, because here we were sitting outside the man's home on the concrete in his driveway. We tried to go inside, they wouldn't let us inside because there are jailers. I mean, it is a jail. Jailers outside that don't let people in. So we were there for several hours, and then people started coming by. And they started coming in cars and motorcycles and walking, and they came by to say, thank you, thank you. Thank you. And they came by to bring us hot tea because it was cold, and they came by to bring us sweets, and they came by to bring us dinner. And all the while we were still worried, because after all, we were Westerners. A lot of people don't like Americans there. And we kept thinking, maybe there are these Taliban types, these Al-Qaeda types that are going to hear about us being here, and they're going to come by and shoot us or chop our heads off. And we were laughing about it. And then all of a sudden, this car pulls up, screeching on the brakes, and 6 men run out. And they have long beards, and they're dressed in these very, very traditional religious robes. And they come running towards us, and I'm thinking, okay, it's the Taliban. This is over. And they come up, and what they run up is to me. And they wouldn't shake my hand because they're very religious and they don't shake women's hands. But what they gave me was a lei of flowers that they wanted me to put around my neck. And they said, we just wanted to say thank you for being here. And it was a beautiful gesture. And then at night, it was about 2 in the morning, and it was very cold, and we were lying on the concrete. The jailer suddenly comes up holding a cot in the air. And he brings me a cot to sleep on. He makes a fire so that we can warm ourselves up. And then he brings out blankets. And there I am at 2 in the morning, sleeping on this jailer's cot. And all of a sudden he comes over and he tucks in the blanket. And I'm thinking, I'm being tucked in by a jailer in front of this guy's house in Pakistan. This is wild. And in the morning, the jailer brought us breakfast. And when it was time for us to go, he had tears in his eyes. And he says, I'm here because this is my job and the only way to feed my family. But I'm really proud that you were here and can't thank you enough. And there's a woman that came right before we left, a Pakistani woman, and we told her, we've never seen this kind of support. And she said, why should you be surprised? You've done more to show the good of the American people than all the millions of dollars that the Bush administration is spending on propaganda here in Pakistan. And what you have to go home and tell your people is that if you show us a little bit of love, you will be showered with love in return. And that's the note that I really think is important for us to keep in mind. That we have been showering the world with bullets. We've been showering them with hatred, with aggression, with tanks, with billions of dollars, the most sophisticated weaponry that humankind has ever come up with. Why not try a little bit of love? A little bit of love goes a long way. And I want to end also with just freeing our minds about war. Because when I talk to a lot of these people outside the recruiting station who are in the military, they always say the same thing. War has always been with us and we will always have war. And we've got to change that mindset. We are on the brink of having a country that was born out of genocide against Native Americans and then on the backs of slaves, might well have a black president in this country. That is amazing. That is mind-boggling. That is, for this country, revolutionary. Why, if we are about to do that, can we not be about to make some major changes in the way that we think about ourselves and the rest of the world? Isn't it time for us to rejoin the rest of the world, to rebuild the international institutions that this Bush regime has demolished, like the United Nations? Isn't it time to recommit ourselves to the Geneva Conventions? Isn't it time to start signing up to some of these international treaties that we are one of the only countries that won't sign, from the treaty to ban landmines to the treaty to ban cluster bombs? Isn't it time for us to do our job at the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which says that we don't want new countries to get nuclear weapons, but the countries that have them are supposed to get rid of them as well? Isn't it time for us to call for global disarmament and to disarm our 10,000 nuclear weapons? Isn't it time for us to spend the best minds that we have in this world not building more weapons of mass destruction, but to put that into getting us off of fossil fuels and getting us into the new clean, green economic age that will stop us from going into wars for oil? It's time for us to start reviving the sense of the possible. And I think that's our moment right now. And so I want to end with maybe you standing and joining me in a song. And this is to the tune of When the Saints, oh, when the Saints come marching in, oh, when the Saints come marching in, oh, how I want to be in that number when the Saints come marching in. And we love to sing in Code Pink even if we have lousy voices. So sing loud. And the first, we'll do maybe 2 of them. When we make peace instead of war, and then the second one we'll do when we teach love instead of hate. Okay? 1, I'll give you the note. When, okay? When we make peace instead of war.